Zane leaned against the rusted railing of the scrapyard, watching the dim glow of neon lights flicker above piles of discarded metal and broken machines. He wasn't sure why he still came here after work. Maybe it was habit, or maybe it was the hope of stumbling upon something interesting. Most of the junk was worthless, but occasionally, there were hidden treasures buried beneath the scrap. Tonight felt no different. He wandered between the piles, kicking a loose bolt as he scanned the lot. Old ship parts, rusted droids, useless tech. Nothing stood out. Then, in the far corner, half buried under debris, he noticed something unusual. A massive, dented container covered in alien markings. It looked ancient. The metal surface was scuffed, worn, and barely visible beneath layers of dust. He stepped closer, running a hand over the surface, brushing off grime to reveal the faint symbols etched into the metal. "Hey, Rig," Zane called over his shoulder. The scrapyard's owner, an old man with grease-streaked hands and a permanent scowl, barely glanced up from his work. "What?" "This container. What's the deal with it?" Rig squinted at the object, then snorted. "Been sittin' there forever. Came in with a haul from an abandoned shipwreck years ago. No one wanted it." He scratched his chin. "I'll sell it to you for a credit." Zane raised a brow. "1 credit? You're joking." Rig shrugged. "Probably empty. Or full of broken junk. Either way, it's taking up space." Zane hesitated. A single credit was basically nothing, barely worth the effort of hauling it home. But something about the container intrigued him. Maybe it was the mystery, the alien script, or just plain curiosity. "Deal," he said, tapping his wristband to complete the transfer. Rig barely acknowledged the sale before going back to his work. Zane sighed, grabbing a crowbar from a nearby crate. The container was massive, heavy, and sealed tight. It took several minutes of struggling before the metal lock gave way with a loud clank. A hiss of pressurized air escaped as the lid cracked open. Zane stepped back as a strange, cool mist rolled out from within. His heart pounded. What the hell had he just bought? Taking a cautious step forward, he peered inside. His breath caught. Lying within the container, stacked neatly in rows, were 6 human-like figures. Women. They were completely still, wrapped in shimmering silk-like material that clung to their forms. Their features were breathtaking. High cheekbones, full lips, and long, flowing hair in shades of silver, violet, and deep blue. Zane's pulse thundered in his ears. These weren't mannequins. They weren't robots. They were real. He took a shaky breath, trying to process what he was seeing. Their chests rose and fell in slow, measured breath. They were alive, but asleep. A soft beep echoed from within the container. One of the women stirred. Zane froze. The first set of glowing golden eyes fluttered open. And then, one by one, the others began to wake. Zane stood frozen as the 6 women slowly stirred, their movements sluggish, as if waking from a deep sleep. The soft glow from the scrapyard lights reflected off their strange, silken coverings, making them look almost ethereal. The first to fully awaken was the woman with dark blue hair. Her glowing violet eyes locked onto Zane, studying him with a mix of confusion and curiosity. She sat up with surprising grace, even as her fingers curled slightly against the metal floor of the container. "Where are we?" she asked, her voice smooth but uncertain. Zane swallowed hard. Earth," he answered, not sure how else to explain it. The silver-haired woman beside her stirred next, rubbing her temple as if fighting off a headache. She turned to glance at her companions before her gaze settled on Zane. "Earth," she repeated. "How long have we been asleep?" Zane hesitated. "I have no idea." The other 4 women began to rouse, blinking as their senses slowly adjusted. One of them, the tallest of the group, tried to rise too quickly and stumbled. Instinct took over, and Zane lunged forward, catching her just before she hit the ground. She was warm. Her hands gripped his shoulders for balance, and for a moment, their faces were only inches apart. The glow in her golden eyes softened, and the faintest blush crept onto her cheeks. You are strong, she murmured. Zane cleared his throat, steadying her. Just quick reflexes. The others watched him closely, their expressions unreadable. He suddenly felt like an insect under a magnifying glass. The blue-haired woman was the first to speak again. Who are you? Zane, he answered. I, bought this container at a scrapyard. A silence stretched between them. The silver-haired woman frowned. You purchased our prison? Zane winced. Prison? The blue-haired one shook her head. Not quite, she said. It was meant to be a stasis vessel. She placed a hand on her chest. I am Selani. Then, she gestured to the others. This is Rhaeyna, Lyriel, Ashari, Nira, and Kaithis. Zane nodded, trying to remember their names. They sounded elegant and alien. So, you're not human? Selani's lips curved slightly. No. Another woman, Rhaeyna with deep violet hair, crossed her arms. How can we trust him? She asked, her voice laced with suspicion. We do not even know why we were in stasis. Zane lifted his hands. Look, I have no idea what's going on either. I just bought the container because I was curious. Ashari, the one who had nearly collapsed earlier, studied him with an intense gaze. Yet you helped me, she mused. You do not seem afraid of us. Zane let out a nervous chuckle. I mean, should I be? For a moment, no one answered. Then, Selani took a step closer. In our culture, a life debt is sacred, she said softly. And you, Zane, have saved us, whether you meant to or not. The air around them seemed to shift. Zane didn't fully understand what she meant, but something told him his life had just taken a turn he could never have imagined. The next few days were unlike anything Zane had ever experienced. He had gone from living an ordinary life to suddenly playing host to 6 alien women, each of whom was far more fascinating than he could have ever imagined. At first, things were awkward. None of them had any belongings, no idea how to blend in, and worst of all, they didn't seem to understand human modesty. This fabric is restrictive, Ashari grumbled, tugging at the hoodie Zane had given her. It's just a sweatshirt, Zane said, rubbing the back of his neck. Trust me, it's better than. He gestured at the shimmering, nearly transparent silk she had worn upon waking. Kaithis frowned as she stretched her arms, the oversized shirt he had lent her slipping off one shoulder. Your garments lack elegance. They also keep you from getting arrested, Zane muttered. Beyond clothing issues, there were other problems, like their overwhelming curiosity about everything. Rhaeyna had discovered human food and immediately developed an addiction to sweet. She had raided his pantry, stuffing her face with chocolate bars and cookies like she had been starving. This is divine, she had moaned, closing her eyes in pure bliss as she bit into a donut. Meanwhile, Kaithis had found Zane's old guitar, plucking at the strings with a mixture of fascination and frustration. It does not respond to my thoughts, she muttered, strumming randomly. Because it's an instrument, not telepathic, Zane explained. Even Nira, the quietest of the group, had her own way of standing out. She barely spoke, but she was always watching him, studying his movements, as if trying to understand what made him tick. But Selani, she was different. She wasn't just observing him, she was learning about him. One night, after the others had fallen asleep, Zane found her standing outside, gazing up at the stars. The soft glow of her golden eyes reflected in the darkness, making her look almost surreal. You're not tired? He asked, stepping beside her. She shook her head. I have spent so long in sleep. I wish to remain awake. Zane nodded, leaning against the railing. You've been handling things well. Earth must be a lot to take in. Selani turned her gaze to him. It is strange, but not unpleasant. For a while, they stood in comfortable silence, the cool night air surrounding them. Then, she finally spoke again. Do humans bond the way our kind does? Zane blinked. Depends. What do you mean by bond? Selani hesitated, then stepped closer, her expression thoughtful. For us, true bonding is not just physical. It is something deeper, A merging of hearts. Zane swallowed. He hadn't expected that. Sounds intense, he admitted. A soft smile touched her lips. Would you be afraid? Zane chuckled, shaking his head. No. Just surprised. Her fingers brushed against his hand, sending a gentle warmth through him. Then perhaps it is something worth exploring. Zane's heart pounded, and for the first time, he realized something. These women weren't just stranded aliens in need of help. They were becoming something more. And his life would never be the same again. The days that followed were a whirlwind. The 6 alien women adapted quickly, almost too quickly. Their sharp minds soaked up information like sponges, and within a week, they moved through human society with surprising ease. Selani and the others had mastered basic human customs, blending in when necessary, though their beauty still turned heads wherever they went. Zane found himself constantly caught between amazement and frustration, especially when they used their otherworldly charm to get what they wanted. Like the time Rhaeyna managed to sweet-talk a cafe owner into giving them free pastries. Or when Ashari, without even realizing it, had drawn an entire crowd just by casually stretching in the park. They stare at us a lot, Kaithis mused one evening, sipping tea on Zane's worn-out couch. Zane sighed, rubbing his temples. Because you all look like goddesses walking around in human clothes. Ashari smirked. And you do not approve? He glanced at her, seeing the playful glint in her golden eyes. He had no real argument, but the longer they stayed with him, the more complicated things became. Because they weren't just guests anymore. They were his. Not in a possessive way, but in the sense that they had chosen to stay, chosen him as their anchor on earth. He felt it in the way Nira always stayed close, silent but watchful. In the way Kaithis had stopped questioning his music, and instead played it alongside him. In the way Rhaeyna had taken to cooking, experimenting with flavors that made her hum in delight. And most of all, in the way Selani looked at him when she thought he wasn't paying attention. One night, when the others had fallen asleep, Selani approached him once more. Her golden eyes held something deeper this time, something unspoken. We were meant to be lost, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Forgotten in that container. Zane's chest tightened. But you're not lost now. She stepped closer, her fingertips grazing his. Because of you. Zane swallowed hard. The warmth of her touch sent shivers down his spine. There was something undeniable between them, something electric yet soothing at the same time. Selani studied his face, searching for something, doubt, fear, hesitation. She found none. Then, she made her choice. Slowly, carefully, she leaned in, her lips brushing his in the softest, most tentative kiss. It was like touching a spark of starlight, warm, breathtaking, and impossibly tender. When she pulled back, her gaze held the certainty of someone who knew. You are ours now, Zane, she whispered. And we'd are yours. He exhaled shakily, his heart pounding. There was no going back. And strangely, he didn't want to.